everybody and welcome back to the FPL Family YouTube channel. I'm Sam and today we're going to be taking another deep dive into a Premier League side. This time my attention is on Chelsea. Now Chelsea were one of those sides that I was expecting big things from in the 2021 season because of all of the activity that they had going into the season in terms of that transfer window. Lots and lots of big signings on the back of obviously a transfer ban, meaning they couldn't do it the season before. But we had a mixed bag of a season for Chelsea. They, in many ways, had a fantastic season. But of course, we had managerial changes during the course of that season as well. And so things weren't necessarily as straightforward as we would have liked as FPL managers. And if we think back to this time last year when we were tinkering with our first drafts for the 2021 season, Werner was one of the most popular options in the game. In fact, going into that opening game week, he was the most popular pick, owned by well over half of the game. And he turned out to not really have the season that we were all anticipating that he would. In fact, by the end of the season, he was 9th for underachievers across the entire season. So he had potential definitely in his opening Premier League season, but never quite lived up to the hype. Before we get into the stats and the graphs, before we get into all of the good talk about Chelsea, let's have a quick look at their statistics from last season. So they were 3rd for touches in the opponent's half over the course of the season, 4th in total for touches in the final third, and back to 3rd again for touches in the box. So plenty of possession from Chelsea. In fact, they were 3rd best for possession across the course of the season, averaging 61.4% possession. So Chelsea doing all the right things in terms of having the ball in the right areas. And when we look at set pieces in a bit, we'll see how they were doing all the right things there. But we never quite got the level of goal scoring that we would necessarily have expected, given the amount of forwards that Chelsea had going into this season. So Chelsea scored 58 goals over the course of the 2021 season. That was the 8th best in the league. With those 58 goals came 38 assists and 15 fantasy assists. Remember, fantasy assists, the ones that don't go down as an assist from the Premier League's perspective, but obviously do for us as FPL managers. So the first graph shows those 58 goals and where they were scored from. Not very many, as you can see from outside the box. Similar to Arsenal from that perspective, most of the goals happening inside that penalty box. And then, of course, the other graph shows us all of the opportunities, all of the goal attempts that Chelsea had over the course of the season. The green ones are the ones that were on target. So whilst we didn't have a large number of goals from Chelsea, what we did have is quite a lot of clinical finishing from the opportunities that they did create. In terms of those goals scored then, as I mentioned, it was a funny season for Chelsea because we were all highly anticipating great seasons for the likes of Werner, Ziyech, Havertz, of course Pulisic. But it was Jorginho that ended up top of Chelsea's goal scorers with seven penalties across the course of the season, and saw him as their top goal scorer over the course of the season, with then Abraham, Mount and Werner coming in second with 6 each, and then Zuma with 5. All of those 5 from Zuma, interestingly enough, came from set pieces. So quite a spread in terms of where those goals are going, and no real standout performers for Chelsea in terms of the number of goals. So going into next season, we're going to be looking at quite a wide spread of players from Chelsea as to who we can invest in. In terms of big chances created, we'll see there, or big chances having been given to them, Werner is top for Chelsea with those, followed by Mount. So again, it's the sort of players that you would expect to be getting them. It's just that Werner wasn't necessarily, he wasn't converting the chances that he was being given. And if he can change that going into the 21-22 season, if he can stay on side, the underlying stats, particularly when you look at his underachievement stats, suggest that he is doing all the right things, just never really lived up to the hype that we as FPL managers, and indeed that Chelsea fans, put on him. Alright then, let's have a little look at these set pieces, because for Chelsea, set pieces were absolutely key. Zuma was top for set piece threat, with Mount and Werner close behind him. He was also top for set piece goals, as I mentioned already, with 5. Now the set piece thing for Chelsea is really, really important. They had 137 attempts from set pieces. This was only beaten by Aston Villa and Liverpool. They were tied first with Liverpool for attempts from corners with 94, and they had the best corner conversion rate last season with 34.1. So all of the stats for set pieces suggest that Chelsea assets are really worth investing in. Even when we look at penalties and such like, we still see some great statistics behind Chelsea there. They were also top for XG from set piece play. So going into next season, looking at the set piece takers for Chelsea could be and looks to be a very sensible and wise idea given how many opportunities they created from there. Chelsea also, we should mention, kept 18 clean sheets. This was the second best in the league last season. Only Manchester City kept more clean sheets than Chelsea did. Conceding just 36 goals, the second best in the league for the number of goals conceded. Again, they only conceded 4 more than City. So doing the right things defensively, and those defensive partnerships look set to be ones that we can invest in, although they are going to be a little bit expensive, but we can invest in for next season. They also conceded just 336 shots. Of those, only Liverpool and Manchester City had fewer. And of those 336 shots, only 107 of them were allowed to go on target. Again, only City had fewer. So defensively, Chelsea doing all the right things. Now, in part, that explains why Mendy took such a price jump this season. Obviously, Mendy's arrival and his ability to kind of cement himself as Chelsea's first choice goalkeeper has meant that he's taken a substantial price rise in FPL going into the new season. Now, for many, you'll question whether it's worth it, but the number of clean sheets, the number of goals conceded, and his ability to regularly start game after game now, which we're expecting to happen in the 21-22 season, does mean that if you do have the budget for a premium goalkeeper, probably Mendy is going to be one of those best options. Chelsea look, particularly since Tuchel has arrived, because obviously some of these stats came from when Lampard was managing and defensively they weren't as strong then. We look to have a really good position where if we have the budget for a premium goalkeeper, Mendy seems to be a good choice. He was second across Chelsea's points for Premier League players last season in terms of FPL points, only beaten, of course, by Mason Mount. Mason Mount had an unbelievable season for Chelsea last year. You're going to have to pay 7.5 million for him this season, but for me, he's worth every penny of that 7.5 million. He was 7th for BPS across the whole game for midfielders last season, 2nd for chances created with 87. Only Bruno had more than he did. He was tied 3rd for crosses with 60 successful ones. Only Gross and Trent managed to do more than him across the course of the 2021 season. He was also 4th for touches in the opposition's half with 1,742, and only Robertson, Trent and Bruno had more than him. For me, his set-piece threat, his underlying stats for the course of the season mean that Mason Mount is absolutely worth every single penny of that 7.5 million. Now, whether you want to boost him and play him alongside one of the other Chelsea attackers also is kind of up for debate. I think Werner was popular last season, obviously has had a price drop this season to 9 million. So offering some value as a pick in the Chelsea starting 11. However, I think at 9 million there are potentially better options across the other teams. And we've already talked about some of them in the previous deep dive videos, the likes of Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, who are going to cost you substantially less than Werner is. Having said that, under Tuchel, his first full season in charge, and with Chelsea solidifying their position as a top 4 or even a championship contender for this season, I suspect we'll see some good things going forward from Chelsea and therefore from Werner also, as long as he can stay on side. Going into next season, of course, there's lots of transfer room around at the moment as to what's happening with the rest of the Chelsea squad, with being rumoured that Abraham and Ziyech look set for a move away from Stamford Bridge. If this happens, then we should see, and I suspect we will anyway, increased game time for Havertz next season, and of course Pulisic if he can stay fit. Both of them look like potentially really, really nice options. You've got to pay a bit more for those guys than you do for Mason Mount, with Havertz coming in at 8.5 and Pulisic at 8. But if you have the budget to go with one of those, they could be great options. I'm not sure how much more they're worth than Mason Mount though, and at 7.5 he feels like a really, really good buy. Looking at that defence then, of course, we see a lot of them listed in the screen that I have in front of you. Those Chelsea defenders have real opportunities to be great assets for us this season. Azpilicueta and Chilwell coming in at 6 million makes them not budget-friendly defenders. However, the amount of clean sheets that Chelsea kept last season, and that was just after Tuchel's arrival primarily, we could see some really, really nice racking up of points from those guys. But for me, it's Reece James that provides the little bit more value. At 5.5 million, he's slightly cheaper. He's going to enable you to buy decent players across the rest of your side. But not only that, with the Hakimi move seeming to have collapsed now, it looks more and more likely that Reece James is going to start potentially on the right hand side of a back three of centre backs. So I think we could see some increased forward movement from Reece James over the course of the season. And having spoken to my family, who, as you know, are huge Chelsea fans, they're backing Reece James for a massive season this season. So going in, if you want to go in with that Chelsea defence and you don't quite have the budget for the likes of Azpilicueta or Chilwell, having a little look at Reece James could be another option. But we shouldn't forget about Zuma, who of course was top for set piece threat and set piece goals in the 2021 season. That's it from me with Chelsea. I'll be back next time to talk about Crystal Palace. Thanks for watching, guys. Remember, at the moment, our patrons are free. If you want to sign up for pre-season, we are not charging anybody. You'll have access to our Slack channel. You'll also have access to our OHANA Podcasts, which are exclusive to our Patreons. If you want to stay and be part of the season with us, then that would be great. But we're not charging anyone until August. So now is a perfect opportunity to come and see what it's like to be a patron with us at FPL Family. I'll put a little link above me. Thanks, guys.